This episode of Transmissions contains references to suicide. Two of the most influential bands in music history.
Almost everything they did in their operation had a sort of perversity to it and a non-conformity.
There's that sort of beautiful street essence in their music. They really are an up-off-the-street band, always have been.
One incredible tale.
New Order were in Ibiza recording Technique.
The studio said, thanks for recording it, would you like a party?
And I believe there was some ecstasy around.
Oh man, we were all off our heads.
This is Transmissions, the definitive story of Joy Division and New Order. Coming up on episode 7, Some Things Click.
The Hacienda was made for acid house. It was made for it. It was like, this is what we've been missing. You know, and it's like, it's packed every fucking night.
Some Things Pop.
It was just a brilliant space to be in, you know, and especially when the drugs kicked in, when everyone was on one.
And some things shatter.
There was no triumphant moment. The vibe was awful. I think we can safely say we hated each other's guts.
I don't know, things had changed. I think because we've been doing it for such a long time, it wasn't an adventure anymore.
New Order's 5th album, Technique, had been an ordeal to make. The marathon party sessions in Ibiza and the desperate deadline scramble to finish the record had nearly broken New Order. But the graft paid off. When Technique came out in 1989, it was everywhere. Photographer Kevin Cummins.
Technique really captured the zeitgeist, I think, at the time, and it set the tone for lots of other stuff that was around. In the NME office, we just had it on the record player all the time. It was constantly playing for weeks on end. And when everybody in the office is into the same thing, that's quite an achievement, to be honest.
New Order had often been ahead of their time, but with Technique, they were perfectly in step with the moment. Just like that, the album went to number 1 in the UK charts, a first in the band's history. After all the expense in getting the record made, Gillian remembers a feeling of vindication at Factory HQ.
They, used to go in and it was like they had a board with how many sales you'd done, and it would be like 500,000, and it would be like you get a gold disc.
But does a silly little thing like a chart position really matter to a band like New Order?
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, yeah, number 1, they got to number 1. And we were aware of it because it was the Hacienda was just taking off. And you could see it all happening around you.
Just as Tony Wilson and Rob Gretton had always imagined, the Hacienda was finally taking off. And the place was packed to the rafters every night.
It was great. I mean, watching the Hacienda and watching Rob and Mike Pickering's belief in Detroit and Chicago house, because those two were championing Chicago house and Detroit house in 1983, 84, all the way through. Nights that they put on with exactly the same DJs that you got in 91, in 83, and nobody there. Then all of a sudden, they got their justification in what they were doing. They believed in the music a long time before ecstasy swept it along in its tidal wave.
Kevin Saunderson is one of the architects of Detroit techno. And he remembers thinking the Hacienda was way ahead of the game during those early, quieter years.
We played many different clubs, and it stood out as the best club. And, you heard house music, you heard Detroit music, you even heard early UK music, maybe Guy Called Drill, stuff like that. It was the closest thing that remind you of a real club, because in Detroit, we really didn't have that, but I got to experience New York, because I was from New York originally. I got to experience Chicago. I mean, I'm talking about places like the Paradise Garage, the Music Box, the Warehouse. And even though those places were predominantly gay, it was a little different in the UK as far as the Hacienda. It was just a mixture of everyone that embraced and loved this music. You knew it was going to be something huge, which eventually it led to all the music really taking off.
Kevin remembers playing one gig at the Hacienda to a quiet room and then returning to find the whole place completely changed.
So we were right there as it transformed. And before you know it, it really transformed faster than you can imagine. Went back home, come back 6 months later, and it's like an explosion, it's like a virus happened. And it just spread. It was just unbelievable.
With their stubborn fixation on synthesizers and drum machines, New Order had been trying to convince the indie kids to dance since the dawn of the decade. And now the culture was finally catching up to them. Andrew O'Hagan.
And it absolutely was an arrow from that, from power, corruption and lies to technique, which is, 6 years later, technique's 1989. But in 83, there was already an absolute arrow going out. We didn't know about Balearic beats in 83. We didn't know about nightclubs, neither did even the Hacienda, which was still traditional in its discofying in some ways. I was in the Hacienda, and it was a renowned club, of course, but it wasn't where it was going to end up, which was the whole birth of the DJ, the Balearic beat, the notion of how you would bend sound and use tracks and samples in the club itself. Well, that influenced New Order, but they already had it in their bones.
In some ways, it must have been a shock to the band to find both their music and their nightclub suddenly so on trend. They'd become quite accustomed to seeing the Hacienda dead.
I mean, we were using it, or I was using it as a kind of adult playground before, going there to eat and going there to drink and using the club nights and, meeting all the people that were in there, taking advantage of that, living it like a pig, with truffles. And coming back from Ibiza, oh my God, what we'd left in Ibiza was in Manchester. It was, wow, they were great times. It was bonkers, absolutely bonkers.
Peter Saville.
I only went once in its heyday, and I just went because Tony insisted that I go. I was living in London. I was busy. I was already in my late 30s. I was not that concerned with taking drugs all weekend. But I did go just to see this phenomenon that had occurred. For me, the remarkable thing about the Hacienda is that it was not exclusive. It was egalitarian. I mean, there'd been famous, legendary clubs before, and also some that looked amazing and explored the kind of aesthetic of their times. But they were usually elitist clubs. They were clubs for a kind of a privileged cognoscente, of connection or wealth. And the incredible thing about the Hacienda was that it was totally egalitarian. I mean, money came from the catastrophe of Joy Division, and it was given back to the young people of Manchester in the form of the Hacienda. It took a few years for those young people to arrive at what was being given to them, but they did arrive.
Manchester's very own DJ Paulette had once been a little bemused by this behemoth in the heart of the city. But when Acid House arrived, she saw the club's reputation change rapidly.
When it started, it was members. And I think that might have been part of the reason why it was empty. But then when you open it out and say, come one, come all, watch what happens to your door. When it becomes like really, really open and there's no distinction between one person and another, and when you are raving on the dance floor next to Neil Tennant from the Pet Shop Boys and Take That, and, you know, whoever else wants to come, Mick Hucknall, you know, they were all in there, but there was no VIP really. So you were on the dance floor, or you were at the bar, or you were upstairs, but everybody was really all together and moving around each other.
Suddenly, the residents of Manchester had a front row seat to a cultural revolution, taking place each and every weekend. For Bernard Sumner, Acid House was the latest in a line of I was there moments.
You know, looking at that all through the only word I can use is career, but it's not really a career. From the days of Joy Division through to now, there's been this kind of synchronicity and zeitgeist moments where things have happened just at the right time.
The Hacienda provided a new model for Manchester, and it transformed the city around it.
It was the ground zero of regeneration. The Hacienda was the example that took a former industrial city and transformed it into a post-industrial city. The Hacienda was a route map forward.
Tom Rowlands of the Chemical Brothers moved to Manchester for university in 1989, the very same year that Technique came out. And he felt that energy that Peter Saville describes all around him.
I grew up outside of London, and it always seemed like the kind of music industry was this removed thing that you didn't have any access to. You couldn't do that unless you were, I don't know, on the King's Road, you know, just some weird thing that you weren't allowed into. Whereas I went to Manchester in the kind of spirit of just doing things yourself, and you'd meet people in the Hacienda, or all the, you know, so many different clubs, you know, apart from the Hacienda, there were so many different clubs going on at the time, people just doing stuff and just being in this town where people seemed to make things happen. And it was small enough that you would see the same people again and again, and you get to know them. And you just, meet people who had studios, who were making records, and you'd hear them at the Hacienda, and someone said, oh, my mate made that kind of thing, being played next to some amazing American, Jack sort of track, and you'd be like, oh, right, this was made of, like Bolton or something. You'd be like, that's good.
Actor and comedian Keith Allen arrived in Manchester to film a TV series at around the same time, and he immediately felt at home in the Hacienda.
Oh, I loved it. It was fantastic. I mean, myself and a wonderful actor called Gary Beadle, we used to go in there. And there was another club. There were a few clubs. There was a gay club called Number One, I think it was. And of course, all gay clubs basically had gangster money in it because they had the best sound systems, So you'd go there with bottles of amyl nitrate and just get on it. And then there was another place called Applejacks, which is where all the United players used to go. It was one of those horrible kind of, wag footballer clubs. And we used to go back to the Hacienda and dance around with Tony Wilson going, Applejacks, Applejacks. In fact, famously, I would be chasing Tony Wilson around the basement, trying to piss on him, I mean, ridiculous. I mean, I sound like some feral child. I was about 37 at the time. It's ridiculous. But Manchester was a great place to be.
BBC broadcaster Joe Wiley.
I remember so clearly the day that we went to the Hacienda for the very first time, and it was like a school outing, but there was a bunch of us who were just, complete music freaks. We loved everything that 4AD and Factory put out, various journalists and record company people. We all made this pilgrimage up to the Hacienda, and just walking through the doors, it was like going to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It was like walking into this mythical land that you'd only read about, and you just couldn't believe. You thought there were going to be unicorns flying around. And in a way, there were. The music was amazing. The building was just every bit that I wanted it to be. It was like going to some kind of Mecca.
The Hacienda may have suddenly been popping, but that doesn't mean it was just another slick nightclub to be seen in. The whole thing was still delightfully shambolic. Pet Shop Boys, Neil Tennant.
The first day we go to Manchester, in the evening, we all go to the Hacienda till, 4 in the morning or later. And it was exciting. That was the first time I'd been to the Hacienda. And it was the whole acid house thing. But it wasn't, the whole baggy thing was going on. There would have been 1 or 2 of Happy Mondays there. And it was quite exciting because that was the sort of high point of that scene, 1989. And this was only March 1989, so it was kind of the epicenter of where it was at that point. It was a funny story, though, because Bernard took us to the Hacienda and we all stood in the queue in the dark alley outside and they wouldn't let Bernard in. And I had to say, excuse me, I am one of the owners.
The Hacienda was thriving, which gave the members of New Order rare cause for celebration.
The Hacienda was made for acid house. It was made for it. It was like, this is what we've been missing. You know, and it's like, it's packed every fucking night. Away! It's all over, and it's kind of like, oh, we've just got to go to an accountant's meeting. It's like, yes, it's doing really well, but it's kind of like ingoings, outgoings, and it's kind of like, well, if it stays like this for the next 100 years, you might break even.
It's fair to say that some of the finer details of accountancy might have been lost on the motley crew running the Hacienda during this long overdue boom time. Resident DJ Mike Pickering.
On the hot night, which was the Wednesday night, Fred, our great handyman at the Hacienda, said, look what I've made. And he was also the host on a Wednesday night, and it was a Wheel of Fortune. And one of them was free drinks for everyone at the bar. Well, obviously, it's got to be weighted away from that, right? I'm stood playing, and he goes, yeah, let's spin it. Oh, of course, it lands straight on free drinks for everyone at the bar. The fucking exodus across the dance floor to the bars. There was people trying to climb over each other. And Fred stood on the stage going, oh my God, what have I done?
Still, why let a little thing like money stand in your way when momentum is finally on your side?
Yeah, at the moment it was doing well. For 1 nanosecond, we decided to buy the building and invest more money in a bar, which was a dry bar. So I think it'd been doing well for 1 month. And then we went, great, it's doing well now, it's a success. Let's open a new bar and let the bar be massive. And, you know, let's invest more money, let's buy the building. And, yeah, not my department. My department was to write songs and play live. You know, it wasn't my department. That's the way I looked at it.
And in that department, everything was business as usual. After Technique was released, New Order set off on another mammoth tour of the United States, their biggest yet. And they even brought Mike Pickering along to make sure that the good times kept rolling.
You know, after the gig, my job was, we set up like a club almost, whether it be backstage at one of the sheds, or I remember doing San Diego University, and we arranged a room there. And I just played for hours and hours, and the band and everyone, all our friends, everyone would just party. But it was incessant, you know. It was, yeah. By the time it finished, everyone was in a bit of a mess, you know.
Yes, that was the, whatchamacallit, Twilight of the Gods, More Drugs Than Led Zeppelin era.
For Bernard, the American tour would prove especially difficult.
By that time, I'd been partying quite a lot. And then we went to Chicago, and a friend of ours over there, Joe Shanahan, had got a club called the Metro, and he invited us out to the Metro. Provided a limo for us, and I got in the limo, and I'd not had much to drink by then, just a couple of drinks, and I just started coughing and coughing and coughing and coughing. Couldn't stop coughing, and I thought, oh, it's not right, this, and I don't feel good. So I got the limo driver to turn around, took me back to the hotel, and then I just carried on coughing till 2 o'clock in the morning, and then started throwing up. And I was still throwing up by maybe 3 o'clock the next afternoon, by which point Rob, our manager, came and went, look, you got to get out of bed. You know, we're going to Detroit today. We were, there was a big party arranged in Detroit, and we had all the house techno DJs there, Kevin Saunderson, everyone. And I went, I can't get out of bed. I'm really ill, you know. And then Tom, our American manager, came in and went, look, he's really ill, he's not going anywhere. He said, there's a hospital right across the road. And he looked out the window, he said, that's the hospital. All we've got to do is go down and lift. I'll go and sort it out. And Tom sorted it out.
At the hospital, Bernard was met by a concerned group of doctors.
He said, we're going to put a fibre optic camera down your throat. And you know those fibre optic lights? I imagine the thin, 2 millimetre thin thing. And they brought this thing in the room, and it was like an elephant's trunk. I'm like, what are you doing with that? I said, well, we're going to put this down your throat, but don't worry, we're going to give you Valium and you won't know a thing. We're going to give it you intravenously. It was like, so they gave it me. Didn't have any effect on me at all because I've been taking Valium all through the tour. It didn't have, I said, it's had no effect. He went, oh, it has. I said, no, I could get up now. I could run around the hospital. I could jog around the hospital. Oh, no, just relax. And then bloody elephant's trunk down my throat and said, you've got loads of tiny lesions on your stomach.
The drinking, the schedule, the partying, all of it had finally caught up with Bernard.
So I ended up in hospital for a couple of days and he just said, you've got to stop drinking on the rest of the tour. So it wasn't very nice. I just felt a bit freaked out by it, but you just had to deal with it in those days.
For better or worse, the machinery rolled on and the tour continued.
I know it sounds really stupid, but we didn't have insurance then, gig insurance. Because we were all young, fit and healthy, but like something like that where he did end up in hospital is like we've never cancelled really any gigs because somebody's been ill, which is really weird. But I mean, you think, oh, well, it's his own fault anyway, you know, drinking a pint of brandy the night before and stuff like that. But it's a bit self-destructive in a way. And you think, well, I don't want to be that self-destructive. I think it takes a lot for somebody to be a front man. And I think in the early days, I don't think he particularly wanted to. But there comes a point where you don't want to destroy yourself because of the band. And you'd hope to think that somebody would help you. But as I say, we didn't really talk about things like that.
The thing is, after a decade on the road, even the partying was starting to feel like work for some of the band.
Hooky loved playing live and he'd go on tour for the rest of his life. And I think he is. But we weren't like that. We were like, oh no, I just want to go home. You know, I've had enough after 5 weeks. I mean, our longest tour was 5 weeks and we had a break in between. But we said we'd never do that again. And I think that's where the tension is, because when you all start together, you all want the same thing. You're at home, but you'd like being away because it's like your first tour or whatever. It's great going to other places and different countries and stuff, so it's exciting. But after you've been going on for like how many years, it loses its appeal. But if somebody else wants to go on tour and they're sort of, oh, come on, and it's like, no.
This divide had been bubbling up in the group for a few years. Bernard had been asking to take a break since Brotherhood.
I think that was the point where I had a word with Rob about feeling like I was burnt out and could we do things on a smaller scale and have a bit of a break and do things at a bit more low pressure, basically, to which he ignored me. And also by that point, things were bad with the band. You know, I was getting a lot of bad vibes, basically, for writing songs. I think because the stuff I was writing was electronic, so I got a bit fed up of that resentment and I got a bit fed up of all the touring.
The guiding principle of the band had always been forward momentum, a determination not to stop. But that policy couldn't hold out forever. Tom Atencio.
I think if you look at the history of the band, from Joy Division through New Order, they have survived and managed to turn in an incredible history of musical contribution through the most difficult times and personal tests. You know, certainly with forming one great band in Joy Division and then having your lead singer top himself is more than a setback. Probably enough to make most people quit. Endless talking, life rebuilding. And then through Factory's own aspirations of having a label and then putting together the biggest nightclub in Europe at the time and the economics of doing that, which was pretty much, I understand, funded with the band. I think most people would have fallen apart over that, over what are we seeing in return for our efforts? Who are we? What have we done?
For the most part, the band had always managed to present a united front, keeping the worst of their inner turmoil from their audience. But word had begun to slip out that even New Order weren't immune to the pitfalls of rock and roll. Andrew O'Hagan.
Great bands were always splitting up over shite, over rubbish arguments, over stupid stuff to do with track listings or lyrics or girlfriends or, things to say yes to or to say no to. There was bad management around very often that caused those bands' problems with each other to get worse. I mean, if you look at a band like the Smiths, they split up over nothing, really, at the height of their abilities, still in their 20s, And New Order did a bit better than that, but, they were always at each other's throats, and the word was always getting through that there was no real harmony among them, that the sound was a fiction. And eventually we came to accept that.
In August of 1989, right at the peak of the second summer of love, New Order were all set to headline Reading Festival. They had a #1 album, a thriving nightclub, a ready crowd of tens of thousands of adoring fans. It should have been a triumphant moment, but Peter Hook doesn't quite remember it like that.
It's like you had everything, but had nothing. And I remember after Reading, the gig was, the usual. Barney was not in a very happy mood, shall we say. Everybody was brought down by the general malaise and the general unhappiness around everything that we were doing. And I remember finishing and thinking, right, I am going to get absolutely wasted. And there was a party on in a gym across the way, and I hooked up with my mates, and my mates were all off their heads, absolutely. And I was going, well, give us some, and none left. I was like, I ended up going to bed with 4 cans of warm lager. And when I got in bed, I was so pissed off. And then my girlfriend went, oh, I can see a party across the way. Should we go? Katie, God rest her soul. And I went, no, I'm not fucking going out. Fucking bastards are all bastards. So I just sat there fuming with me 4 cans of warm lager. And she went off to the party and came back in about 7 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, it was the perfect shit end. Look back now, I can't believe that we would do something so good and ruin it the way that we did. I can't imagine why. Whatever it was that caused the unhappiness was so deeply rooted in us that it was impossible for the most part to shake it off and enjoy what you'd achieved and what you had.
In typical New Order fashion, the malaise went unarticulated, but everybody felt it.
There's only so much time you can spend working together, because it's like you're not only working, you're actually living. We used to live in a flat together, and if you did that for 24 hours for like 10 years, I think you would get sick of each other. And you want to be at home, and you want to, well, I did anyway, you want to get a house, you want to have your own life away from the band, but it's all consuming, some of the time. So it's just a natural progression. But you can always look back and theorise on why did that happen and why did that happen. But the feeling was mutual amongst all of us, really.
Andrew O'Hagan.
New Order, they pressed each other's buttons, quite literally, and probably made each other raging. And there were days when they thought anything in the world would be more desirable than this, being in this room with these people. And that's what happens with young people in bands, They learn too quickly to hate each other. Another couple of decades and they would realise probably that is and would be eternally the best moments of their lives, and the opportunity to cling on to it should probably have been taken. But they did all right, actually. They clung on to each other probably for as long as they were physically and humanly able.
And that was the truth of it. For whatever reason, they were no longer able to stick it out. The Reading headline set offered a natural punctuation point on all things New Order. There was nothing else in the diary, no more tours, nothing to keep the band together.
No one actually said it, but there was kind of like a sense of finality about it, that perhaps we just got in a car and said, right, bye. And yeah, that was it, really. I mean, we'd all been living in each other's pockets for probably far too long. And if you actually think about it sensibly, there was a break being made already. Because I remember in Ibiza sitting by the pool, Rob Gretton saying, well, you know, I'm going to be busy doing other things in the future. I'm going to be managing Bernard and Johnny's new thing, electronic, and you have to get someone else to look after New Order. So it's kind of like...
After the Reading headline sets, Bernard focused his attention on his new project, Electronic, with the Smiths guitarist Johnny Marr. And the others in New Order, they also sought their own refuge from the turmoil of it all. Peter Hook formed an outfit known as Revenge, also signed to Factory, and Gillian and Stephen, they began making music as the other two.
That was it. Bernard was off going to go and do Electronic, and sort of Hooky, well, I've got to do something then. He didn't know what it was, but Hooky was got to do something. And me and Gillian, New Order had agreed to write music for this BBC series, comedy drama called Making Out. And the idea was we'd cut up bits of technique, and that would be the soundtrack. And the sort of tracks that we've never used would be in it.
And so New Order was fractured, its composite parts scattered to the wind. No discussion of what the future may hold, no certainty that it would hold anything at all. Maybe this would be the end of it.
And like, we'd never planned a year in advance, and it was like totally alien. It's really weird because you just lived in the moment. You never really thought, my career's going to span, I'm going to be doing that in 10 years' time. We never sort of looked ahead like that. But you do feel sick of New Order at that time. So the thought of going back, I don't know, you just didn't think of it, you just thought of the next thing.
New Order sort of like was placed in a state of suspended animation. And that's what happened. We had a break. It wasn't really like, oh, we could do with a break, because nobody would really say that. It's a New Order thing. Nobody would actually say, I'm fucking sick to death of you. I can't stand to be in the same room as you for another minute, because I'm not that kind of person. Bernard's not that kind of person. And Gillian's definitely not like that.
But even when the band were pulling away from each other, it was difficult to truly get any distance, because they weren't just members of New Order. They were co-owners of the hottest club in Europe, the venue at the very heart of this utopian new movement that was transforming the world around them.
It really was that sort of like what I imagine the 60s at UFO was like. This is like a movement. You know, it's a really big thing. This is the biggest thing that I've probably happened in my lifetime. It's like, great, we can change the world. And then kabang, machine guns, cocaine, criminals, people started dying. And that's the sort of downside of it.
The UK's first ever ecstasy-related death happened in the Hacienda in July of 1989. And from that point on, the club was besieged by trouble. Gang violence, police crackdowns, forced periods of closure.
We thought, oh wow, how amazing, owning your own club. You don't have to pay to get in, you get free drinks. Wow, lucky sods.
Andy Williams of Doves. He got to know Rob Gretton when his first band, Sub Sub, signed to Rob's label in the early 90s.
And then, fast forward 3 years when we'd be in Game West, which is Rob Gretton's office upstairs, and hearing all this shit going down with the bouncers, and it's like, you went full circle, like, oh my God, what a nightmare owning a club.
As it turned out, owning a successful nightclub was almost as stressful as owning a failing one. Keith Allen.
It's like an iceberg. It looks great on the top, but it's seeing all that stuff under the bottom. Ooh, no. Before the guns started, and before it got bad on Moss side, before the gangs got involved, really, it was great.
Tony Wilson had always seen the Hacienda as a crucial loss leader for all things Factory and New Order.
Right? New Order have never in their lives been able to put a value on the hipness or the still hip quotient that this club gives them. If they weren't part owners of one of the most glamorous and wonderful nightclubs in Europe or the world, then people might notice that they were actually old bezies.
But even Tony had to admit things weren't going to plan. As the UK headed towards a new decade, a cold wind began to blow. And it wasn't just the gangs. Peter Saville.
I remember saying to Tony in '89, there's a recession coming, and somehow he thought that Manchester might be immune from it. He said, yes, in London perhaps, but not here. And, he was wrong about that. I mean, it is important to recognise that up until that point, Factory had existed for about 14 years without a decision ever being taken on the basis of profitability.
And so, at the dawn of the 1990s, with the decade that New Order helped to define crumbling into recession, it seemed like a natural endpoint to this whole thing might have arrived. New Order were on an indefinite break, sick of the very sight of each other. The Hacienda was once again in hot water. Factory Records was teetering on the brink of ruin. What could possibly reverse fortunes at this late stage?
Well, some of the crowd are on the pitch.
Next time on Transmissions.
Someone come up and say you'd write a song for the FA, I'd have gone, are you serious? No fucking way.
The band, as I understood from Tony, weren't natural football fans.
And then Tony said, I know who knows about football. Keith, we'll get him to do it. So he asked me while I was up in Manchester. I said yes.
In the face of all this adversity, we ended up with another our only number one single with a comedian and a football team.
In the final part of Transmission Season 2, we're singing for England. Transmissions, the definitive story of Joy Division and New Order, is a Cup and Nuzzle production. It's presented by me, Elizabeth Holker. Our series producer is Frank Palmer. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts.